A wooden shaft, no, a message. Straight through his gray wool, and he didn't even scream. A morning so foggy you could taste the damp wool of your own tunic. And the smell, well, it was all diesel exhaust and cold. Limestone. You hear those Panzers? No, those clanking iron monsters grinding their tracks on the gravel. Screech, crunch, a rhythmic kind of horror that gets in your teeth and makes them rattle. The Krauts were walking into the village like they owned the very dirt beneath their boots. Confident. Holding those machine guns, those MP40s that could spit lead faster than a man can pray. Then, well, it wasn't a bang. It wasn't the sharp crack of the cold rifle. Just a soft, wicked whistle, like a bird's wing cut in the mist. Thud. The officer just stops. He looks down at his chest like he's forgotten something important. And there's a yard of ash wood buried deep in his ribs. Feathers still shaking, vibrating, against the gray of his uniform. I remember the sound of the bowstring. A deep, resonant twang. A band bat that echoed off the stone walls like a heartbeat from 1,000 years ago. And then the silence. It was heavier than the tanks. You see 'em, those German boys, breathing hard, their breath turn into thick steam in the cold air, eyes wide. Darting around, looking for a sniper, looking for a muzzle flash that ain't ever coming. Because they ain't fighting a soldier from this century. They're fighting a ghost with a grudge. The world, it's got radar now. It's got rockets and tanks that can flatten a house without breaking a sweat. But Jack, well, Jack Churchill just reminded everyone that a piece of wood and a bit of sharpened steel can still take your life before you hear the Reaper coming. It's a funny thing, how a bit of yew wood looks so small and fragile against the iron of a Panzer. But when that string snaps, you don't think about the machine or the factory or the assembly line anymore. You think about the man in the shadows. I once knew a fella in the trenches who said the only thing louder than a grenade is the silence after an arrow finds its mark. He was right. It's a quiet kind of terror. The itch of the lice in my wool collar. The metallic, copper taste of the fear on my tongue. It all felt real again when I saw that shaft sticking out of him. The only longbow kill of the whole damn war. A wooden needle in a haystack of lead and cordite. And it sent a shiver right through the spine of the Nazi machine. Jack. He was just standing there in the shadows of a stone barn, holding 6 feet of yew like it was a scepter from an old, forgotten kingdom. He didn't look like us. He didn't look like he belonged to the mud and the grease. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a tapestry. And the tanks, they just kept rumbling on the road. But the air had changed. It didn't belong to the diesel or the oil anymore. It belonged to the wood and the bone. I remember the way my hands were shaking. Not from the cold, but from the pure, raw absurdity of it all. We were supposed to be the masters of the machine, but that arrow, it made the machine look like a toy. Sort of haunting, isn't it? Just the sound of the wind through the eaves, and the ghost of 1,000 years ago, breathing in the French mud, waiting for the next string to snap. And the mist, it just kept rolling in. Thick and white and smelling of wet stone. Down in the cellar, it's damp. Smells like wet lime and old potatoes. Shink, shink. That's the sound of the past coming for the present. Jack's in the basement. It's cold. The kind of cold that gets into your marrow and just Well, it stays there. Shink, shink. That's the stone eating away at the steel. Jack ain't looking at a map. No, he's looking at the edge of his broadsword. A Scottish broadsword. Right here in the middle of a war made of grease and gears. The lads, they're cleaning their Enfields, using those oily rags. The smell of cordite and the cold rifle oil is so thick you can almost chew it. They're looking at him like he's lost his damn mind. Maybe he has. But Jack, he just looks back. Eyes like flint, hard and gray. He says, any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. And you gotta wonder if he's joking. But he ain't. Not even a little. The Stukas are screaming outside. That siren, the Jericho trumpet, it makes your stomach drop through the floorboards. Vroom! The whole house shakes, dust falling from the ceiling, drifting down into his water bucket. But Jack, he don't flinch. He's that chat, tightening the leather straps on his kilt, checking the drones on his bagpipes, like he's getting ready for a wedding or a funeral, or maybe both at once. His hands are steady, though wrap rough, stained with bowstring wax and the memory of old blood. He thinks we're the lazy ones. Yep, he told us once. Guns are for those who don't want to look 'em in the eye. Sort of haunting when you think about it. We're just numbers in a ledger to the brass. But to Jack, this is a ritual. It's the mundane horror of it all. The way the lice itch in your wool collar while you watch a man string a 6-foot bow, you wood, heavy, groaning, under the tension. Creak, just like the house above us. I can see the light flickering off the steel. A single silver needle in the dark. He's checking the two he can, the bagpipes, like they're a loaded weapon, which I guess, well, to him, they are. The vibration of the diesel engines, the Panzers. It's a rhythmic thud, thud, thud in the dirt floor, a heartbeat of iron. But the stone on the steel, it's sharper. It cuts right through the drone of the machine. The sweat's rolling down his neck into that wool collar. You know the feeling. That scratch, that constant bite of the fabric that makes you want to tear your skin off. He's checking the fletching on those arrows, goose feathers, white as a ghost's wing, against the black oil on the floor. It shouldn't be here. None of it should. We're supposed to be moving toward a world of atoms and radar. But here he is, pulling us back to the mud and the blade. It's a though bow, brutal, sort of elegance. He ain't going to a fight. He's going to a ceremony. And God help anyone who ain't invited. Shink, shink. The stone don't lie. It tells you when the steel's ready. And Jack, he knows. He's got that look. The one that makes the CO cross the street. It ain't madness, not exactly. It's just, well, it's focus. He's Nap Kung, stringing the bow now. A long, slow pull. You can hear the wood complaining. Creak! It's you wood, old as the hills. And he treats it like it's his own arm. The light from the single candle. It's flickering. Shadows jumping on the damp stone walls like specters. Blowing a little air through the pipes. It sounds like a dying animal. A low, mournful groan. And you realize he's going out there to be the loudest thing in a war that wants to hide in the grass. The Lang Commando. They're checking their safeties. Click, clack. Metallic, cold. But Jack, he's checking the Langi, the ceremony. He's got his broadsword Tuotran, drawn, now, just for a second, to see how the light hits the oil. He calls it proper dress. I call it a death warrant. But you don't say that to Jack, not if you want to keep your teeth. The air's getting thinner. Or maybe that's just the fear. It tastes like copper and chalk, and the vibration, it's getting louder. The machine is waking up. But in this cellar, it's still the age of the sword. I remember a boy from Liverpool used to polish his buttons until they shone like gold. Even in the mud. Said it made him feel like a man. But Jack, he didn't care for buttons. He cared for the edge. Only the edge. The stone stops. Silence fills the cellar, thick as the fog outside. He stands up, the leather of his gear creaking like a ship's hull. He looks at us. No, he looks through us, and for a minute, I swear the steel looked more real than the tanks. Just the sound of his breath. Slow, cold, steady. He's ready to walk out into the smoke, into the Symphony of the Kantui, where the machine can't follow, just the ghost of 1,000 years ago, breathing in the dark, waiting for the ramp to drop. The ramp, it didn't just fall, no, slammed down like the hand of God, hitting the water. And Salerno, well, no, wasn't a beach. No, was a furnace. A morning so bright nor hurt your eyes? But the smoke turned everything into a gray, choking dream. You could taste the diesel, that oily, heavy film that coats your tongue and makes the water in your canteen taste like a garage floor. And the salt, it was everywhere, stinging the cuts on your hands, itching under the wool of your tunic where the sweat had dried into white crusts. We were all huddled there, lean commando, our faces painted with that greasy black soot, looking like ghosts before we were even dead. The vibration of the boat, a low, rhythmic thud, thud, thud against your boots, and it felt like your own heart trying to climb out of your chest. I remember looking at a boy from Liverpool, no, Manchester. His eyes were so wide you could see the whites from across the craft, and he was shaking, just a little, like a leaf in a gale. The MG-42s, they call them Hitler's buzzsaw, and they sounded exactly like that. A ripping, tearing noise that just shredded the air, the thwip, 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 hitting the metal, hull, and then the ramp went down. The water was cold, colder than it had any right to be, and it pulled at your legs, trying to drag you under with 80 pounds of gear on your back. And the smell, Lord, it was cordite and ozone and burning rubber and that metallic copper tang of fear that you never really forget. But then, over the roar of the mortars and the chatter of the guns, you hear it, a wail, high and lonesome, like a dying animal or a screaming angel. The pipes, Jack, he wasn't ducking. Nah, he wasn't crawling in the sand like the rest of us mortals. He was standing right there on the edge of the craft, upright, looking like he was on a stage at the Highland Games instead of a meat grinder. He was playing Will You No Come Back Again? And the sound, well, Na was a thuck the Phi Lee. Na was a living thing, screaming through the smoke, defiant, and just, well, mad. You could see the German boys up in the dunes. Their firing slowed for just a heartbeat, just enough to wonder if they were seeing a man or a specter from the old legends. The pipes gout that they didn't just play. They bled into the air. I remember the way the chanter sounded, sharp and discordant against the thump-thump of the shells hitting the surf, a symphony of the impossible. Jack, he had this look on his face, calm, almost bored, like he was properly dressed and the rest of the world was just untidy. Then he tossed the pipes. No, he set them down, and he reached for the steel, the broadsword. It came out of the scabbard with a sound like a winter wind. Zoet, a cold, silver shink that you could hear even over the artillery. Gnaw glinted in that harsh Italian sun, a bright, jagged needle of the past, in a world of lead and iron. He didn't shout a command. He just waded into that surf, waist deep, holding that heavy Scottish blade high, and he walked toward the guns like he was invulnerable. The water was spraying up around him, white foam and red blood, and the sound of the pipes was still ringing in my ears, even after he'd stopped. I remember the sand in my teeth, gritty and sour, and the way the rucksack straps were digging into my shoulders, the mundane horror of a heavy pack when someone's trying to kill you. Funny how you notice the small things, like the way the sun caught the Celtic designs on his hilt, or the way the water filled my boots, heavy and squelching with every step. Jack. He was a vie than Chien Tran, an ancient thing, moving through the smoke. And for a minute, I swear the bullets just, well, they seemed to miss him on purpose. The smell of the sea rot and the burnt powder, gnaw stays with you. Gnaw's in my lungs right now while I tell you this. I see him, standing there between the waves and the wire. A ghost with a sword in a war made of machines. And the wail of those pipes. It didn't just fade. It just became part of the wind. A haunting, lonely note that says the individual, the soul, it don't go down without a fight. I remember the taste of the salt on my lips, bitter and sharp, and the sight of that steel flashing over the dunes. We followed him. Of course we did. You don't stay down when a man is walking into hell playing a tune. Gnaws the contrast, the wood and the bone versus the steel and the oil. And that day, the wood and the bone were louder. Just a man, and a blade, and a song against a whole damn army. And the surf just kept rolling in, washing away the footprints but leaving the memory. I can still hear that drone, that low, thrumming sound of the bagpipes, mixing with the rumble of the Panzers in the distance. Gnaws a sound that don't belong in this century. But Lord, it's the only sound that made any sense at all. The glint of that steel. It's the last thing I see when I close my eyes. A sharp, cold light in the middle of a burning world. And the whale, always the whale, drifting out over the water, calling us back to a time when war had a face, and a sword had a soul, sort of makes you wonder what we lost along the way. Just a ghost in the spray, and the smell of the salt, and the long, slow crawl of the tide. The night. It wasn't just dark, it was heavy, thick, like the smell of those lemon trees pressing down on your lungs. We were in Italy. A grove outside Pinedo. No, it was further south than that. And the air, it had this sweet and sour tang that didn't belong in a war. Funny how small things stick with you. Like the way the leaves sounded under our boots. Dry. Brittle. Sounded like breaking glass every time you shifted your weight. Jack, he was ahead of me. Or maybe he was further into the shadows. He moved like a specter that had lost its owner. He didn't have the cold rifle. Well, he had that broadsword. That heavy piece of Scottish history strapped to his hip, and a corporal with him. Just two men walking into the mouth of the beast. The naval guns were thumping in the distance, a low, rhythmic vibration you felt in your teeth more than your ears. But here, in the dark, it was silent. Too silent. You could hear the blood thumping in your own head, and the itch of the wool. That damn wool tunic scratching at your neck like 1,000 lice. I remember the taste of the stale tobacco on my tongue, bitter and dry. Then, he does it. I didn't see him move. I just heard it. Chouette. That kick-hang, soft sound of steel slipping out of a leather scabbard. It's a cold sound, a shink that makes the hair on your arm stand up. He didn't shout. He just stepped into the faint light of a German outpost, the moonlight catching the blade, turning it into a jagged silver needle in the blackness. 42 of them. 42 Jerry boys just sitting there. And they froze. The look on their faces, well, it wasn't just fear. It was confusion. Like they'd seen a specter from a nightmare. No, a legend. Jack. He puts the tip of that blade. No, it was the edge. Right against the sentry's throat. You could see the man's pulse jumping against the steel. Thump. Thump. It was Lang boot, ice cold. A different kind of terror than a bullet. See? A bullet is just a thing that happens to you from 100 yards away. It's impersonal. But a sword is personal. It's an ancient kind of horror that gets in your blood. Jack told him he had a whole brigade behind him. An army of ghosts waiting in the trees. And they believed him. Why wouldn't they? Looking at a man with a broadsword in the middle of a world of tanks, you'd believe anything the dark told you. He marched them out, one by one, the leaves crunching under their boots, a long, gray line of men surrendering to a single shadow. I remember the taste of the dirt in my mouth, dry, metallic, and the way the rucksack straps were digging into my shoulders. The mundane horror of a heavy pack when you're trying to stay quiet. Jack just whistled a little tune, looking like he'd just finished a stroll in the park. He didn't care about the machine guns. He knew the blade was louder in the dark. The vibration of the enemy trucks started up again in the distance. But it didn't matter. The grove was quiet now. Just the smell of lemons and the sound of 42 pairs of boots huffing toward the cages. Sort of haunting, isn't it? The individual versus the impossible. And the impossible just gave up. Just an image of that silver blade catching the moon. And the long, cold silence of the night sort of makes you think about what we're really afraid of when the lights go out. Just the wind now, and the smell of the fruit, and the ghost of the night. Breathing in the Italian mud. The wire, well, it had a certain hum to it. A low, electric buzz that stayed in your teeth all night long. And Sachsenhausen, it wasn't a place for a man who carried the 14th century in his pocket. All gray concrete, gray soup, gray faces staring through the rime on the windows. The smell, Lord, it was boiled cabbage and lime, and that sharp, metallic stink of old fear that you just can't scrub off the walls. Jack was in there. A night in a cage of iron and searchlights. But you can't cage a ghost. Not for long. He started Dowham, digging a tunnel, with nothing but a piece of a spoon in his own bare hands. I remember a fellow once told me that the earth under a camp tastes different. Tastes like every man who ever died, hoping to see the sky again. Jack, he was down there in the dark. The mud, getting under his fingernails until they bled. The itch of the lice in the seams of his shirt a constant, crawling reminder that he was still meat. But the machine, it couldn't hold him. He escaped once, crawled out like a rat into the night. But they found him, dragged him back to the cold, white lights. Then, well, something happened. The power went out. Total darkness. The kind where you can't tell if your eyes are open or shut. And in that silence, when the machine stopped breathing, Jack was gone again. He didn't wait for a sign. He just stepped into the shadows and kept walking, heading for the Alps, those big, silent, white teeth of the mountains. Think about that. 150 miles. Every step in those thin, tattered boots, the leather worn through until he was walking on the crust of the snow. It makes this sharp, snapping sound, like breaking glass. He didn't have a map. He didn't have the cold rifle. He didn't even have his sword. All he had was a lawn hante, a tin of onions he'd pinched from a kitchen somewhere. He'd eat 'em raw. They tasted like fire and earth and life. The only thing keeping the engines in his legs moving. The cold up there, it wasn't just in the air. It was in your bones. A deep ache and chill that makes your vision blur and your breath come out in ragged, white clouds. He'd find a hollow in the snow, huddle there until the sun started to bleed over the peaks. Then he'd get up and do it again. His feet, well, they weren't feet anymore. They were just bloody blocks of ice. But he kept moving. The individual versus the impossible. And the impossible was starting to look a bit shaky. I remember the taste of the snow, flat and metallic. Never quite quenching the thirst. Jack, he looked like a beggar, clothes in ribbons, skin stretched tight over his ribs like old parchment. But he still had that look, that flinty defiant stare, that sack lion, sharp cold, in his eyes that said the world ain't big enough to cage him. The wind up in those peaks, it don't just blow, it howls. Sounds like Ken Toohey, like bagpipes, wailing from across the sea, calling him back to a fight that wasn't over yet. He walked until the gray of the Nazi machine started to fade into the green of the valleys. And then he saw them. The armored columns, the smell of diesel and real tobacco. He just walked out of the mist, a ragged, one-eyed ghost holding nothing but a broken dream and the memory of his broadsword. The American boys, well, they almost shot him, thought he was a specter from the old legends. He stood there in the middle of the road, mud on his face, snow in his beard, and he just asked for a smoke. Funny how small things stick with you. Like the way the first puff of a real cigarette tastes after you've been eating dirt for a month. It's the mundane horror of it all. The way the snow felt like needles against his face. And the taste of those onions, lingering on his tongue like a promise. He was an anachronism in motion, a baitheux, a poem, of blood and steel moving through a world that had forgotten how to be human. Just an image of his shadow on the white slope, long and jagged and alone. And the sound of his breath, slow, cold, steady, like he was never really there at all. Just a legend the snow made up to keep itself company. We heard about it later. How he just walked out of hell like he was strolling through a park in London. Didn't say much. Just wanted to get back to the lines. Wanted to find another sword. The machine keeps trying to count us, to put us in boxes, and we just keep walking out of the dark, carrying nothing but the spirit of 1,000 years ago. Just the wind now, and the ghost of the night, breathing in the alpine mud, waiting for the next sunrise, and the taste of the cold, it stays in your throat, like charcoal and iron. He was Roy, ragged. Yeah, but his eyes, Lord, those eyes were still sharper than any blade they ever forged. The guns, well, they didn't so much stop as they just died. Out. A queer kind of silence. The kind that rings in your head louder than any mortar. Loud enough to make your teeth ache. I remember seeing Jack. He was standing right in the middle of a pile of scorched bricks. No, it was a village square, or what was left of one. He was holding that broadsword. But the steel, it was snapped. A jagged, broken tooth of a blade. He didn't look like a man who'd just won. He looked like a man who'd just lost his last friend. He looked at us, all of us cheering and passing around whatever rot gut we'd found, and he just spat in the mud. He said, "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going another 10 years. He wasn't joking. You could see it in his eyes, that sharp, flinty look that hadn't changed since the first day in France. To him, well, the war wasn't a job, a ceremony, and the ceremony was over. He had to go back to a world that didn't have a place for ghosts with longbows. I saw him a few years later, on a train heading into London. He was wearing a suit, one of those itchy, gray wool things that makes your skin crawl after 5 minutes. He had a briefcase, brown leather, smelling of stale paper and office dust. He looked like a caged beast, trapped in a world of schedules and tea breaks. He's sitting there, and suddenly, he just stands up. He slides the window open, the soot and the cold air bursting in, and he just hurls that briefcase into the dark. Watched it bounce into the weeds along the tracks. He said it made him feel cluttered, like he couldn't breathe with all that plastic and leather around his neck. He didn't belong to the age of the atom. He belonged to the age of the blade. He was a poem written in blood and yew wood, a soul that the machine couldn't digest. Funny how you remember the small things, like the way his hands, calloused and scarred, looked so wrong holding a newspaper. The smell of the city, it was all damp pavement and coal smoke. It didn't have the bite of the salt or the lemon groves. He wasn't meant for the peace. Peace is just a long, slow wait for the end. I sometimes walk past a garden in the suburbs, and I see a longbow, a 6-foot piece of history, just leaning against a red brick wall. It looks out of place, like a bone sticking out of a sidewalk. The neighbors, they just see a bit of wood. But I see the arrows. I see the fog in the French village. And if you stay still, if you listen to the wind when the sun is turning the sky the color of a fresh wound, you can hear it. A single, lonesome drone of the bagpipes, fading out over the rooftops. It ain't a happy sound. It's a haunting, a reminder that the world got smaller when the sword stopped flashing. The machine, well, it converted us into numbers, into beads on a wire. We became parts of a grand assembly line of peace, but it never got Jack. He stayed a man, a madman, in a world that had forgotten what it meant to be truly alive. Just an image of that broken blade, catching the last bit of light in a dusty corner, and the smell of the damp earth, and the ghost of the night, melting into the evening mist. Sort of makes you wish for the noise again. Just for a minute, just to see that steel in the air one last time. Just the wind now, and the silence, and the memory of the bowstrings snap, echoing in the dark.